Hotep. I'm Dr. Gloria Latimore-Peace, host and producer of the H3o Art of Life show. The title of this show is And Justice for All, with several question marks following. I have very wonderful guests who are with me here in the studio, two attorneys, one of whom is attorney Robert Willis.
Good afternoon.
He's been in private practice for 33 years.
Yes, ma'am.
He specializes in criminal law in federal and state courts. He was a law clerk for R. Eugene Pencham, one of our favorite judges, appellate court judges. He studied law in Ghana. That's my ancestral home. And you're licensed to practice there.
Yes, ma'am.
And he taught and lectured on criminal law and constitutional law in several schools, churches, and community groups. And that's not all, but that's all that I'm going to tell. He'll tell the rest. Then I have James M. Jack Childs, Jr. Now this is interesting. A former factory worker, a janitor, a school teacher, a human relations officer for the city of Chicago, lecturer at Malcolm X, attorney, and currently an international trader in commodities. What? Okay, that journey, I have to have a little bit about that journey.
Well, as most of us proceed through life, even though I was the beneficiary of parents who did have education, black folks don't have a lot of money. So I had to do jobs, work my way through school and all that kind of good stuff. So I learned a lot of things along the way. And as I acquired those skills, I then acquired the skills to go through school. So I'm very blessed in that relationship. So one of my most interesting jobs, though, I have to tell you, was being a school teacher in the public school system of Dayton, Ohio, which is just like Chicago's public school system. I got a first-hand view of what was happening with our young people. And I submit to you, Dr. Peace, that is no difference when I did it in 69 to 70 and what's going on now. In 69, my 8th grader, beautiful girl, she used to come to school immaculate. I used to say, wow, she's wearing makeup and pregnant. Okay? Pregnant. Now, after I left that, I said, man, I just can't sit in the classroom all day. So I came to Chicago where half of my family already lived, and I had been coming here since I was 4 years old. So it's like coming to my second home. I get a job with the city of Chicago. My job is in discrimination, compliance and investigations. I had to go to establishments in Chicago and check and see if they would allow black patrons. And I can say to you, Dr. Peace, I have been kept out of some of the more interesting establishments in Chicago history. They wouldn't let me in on certain establishments on Rush Street. They wouldn't let me in certain establishments on North Broadway. It was quite fascinating. And as I was doing that, I was going to law school. And so the rough and tumble era of Chicago law, I have to say this to you. Sitting next to me is one of the greatest lawyers in the history of the town and the nation. This gentleman is a purity expert. Most of his clients don't appreciate him because, you know, that's what clients do. But I'm here to tell you, I've seen him work. This is the only lawyer I know that has won 2 multiple defended trials in federal court in Chicago, right here. Nobody else has done that. Most people lose because the deck is stacked against you in a multiple defendant trial. Ergo, they're trying people like, at the time he won one case, it was the El Rukins. Now, you know, if you go in the courtroom and say, oh, this guy is a member of the El Rukins and all these other 7, 8 guys, the jury is what? Oh, we're going to get all these guys. he won. And so that makes me proud. But Chicago black lawyers are some of the greatest lawyers you will ever find. But you won't hear people in the street saying that. They'll be complaining. But on the other side of the ledger, we know that people go to penitentiary that haven't had black lawyers and be bragging about, oh, my lawyer got me 15 years. And if it's a lie, I need to be struck down dead right here. That's what they be doing. So the chasm we are talking about, and I'm leading into the bigger question about justice. I submit to you, Dr. Peace, for black people in America, there is no justice. There never has been any justice. And our people are naive because they think they're going to go to court and get justice. That is the harbinger of the injustice. And it is the brave black men and women of the black bar, like in Chicago and other places, in Illinois, for instance, that have fought tremendous fights to try to protect our people at numerous terms. And, you know, I turn it over to Robert.
Attorney Willis, I knew we were going to hear some more about you, but I didn't know he was going to tell it. I want to hear it from your own mouth. I want to hear about your journey, because you didn't wake up a lawyer, so there had to be some things that happened prior to that.
Well, I most assuredly didn't. I was not born a lawyer, that's for sure, but I was born into a family of educators in Louisville, Kentucky. I have generations of black teachers that nurtured me and made sure I stayed on the path. So I've been around. Fortunately for me, when I came to Chicago, I met Brother Childs. I met Brother Lou Myers, the late Lou Myers.
I know him.
I met the Honorable Eugene Pincham. I met a lot of black men, including his father, who were very instrumental in assisting me in keeping me focused and instilling in me courage, and also teaching me to do what I do, including that's Mr. Charles Butler Evans, who was my main mentor as I was coming up in the streets of Chicago as a lawyer. So that's it.
Okay, so these cases that he's talking about that you tried and were successful in winning, what was so important about these cases that they should be pointed out as examples?
The case I participated in, I came up in a time when they were breaking up the so-called street organizations.
Okay.
Particularly the Arookan Nation.
Mm-hmm.
The Vice Lords and other organizations were being targeted by the government. Even the Gangster Disciples were being targeted by the government. Mm-hmm. And they were indicting people in conspiracy cases where you may not have been even really involved in the situation, but because under conspiracy law, minimal participation brings you into the ambit of a government indictment. Mm-hmm. They were indicting people at 15, 20, 30 at a time. And at that time, they were giving out life sentences like it was water. 30 years, 40 years. And these young brothers at that time were in their early 20s, middle 20s, early 30s, and were getting substantial amounts of time. And there were some brothers who took the position, we're going to go to trial. We're not going to plead out to these particular situations here. And I just was bought into the situation and was fortunate enough in the cases I was in to represent some people that were able to walk out the door at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And these cases lasted, the two cases that Jack is talking about, one case lasted 4 months, one case lasted 5 months, because of the amount of evidence that was involved, and the whole theory of the government was we're going to wipe these people out and take them off the streets forever. Mm-hmm. And that's basically what they've done. Mm-hmm. And you are seeing that mirrored here in Chicago today. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's what it was about. But basically these were conspiracy cases involving quote unquote drugs, involving murder, involving other forms of criminal activity because they were saying these entities were criminal enterprises. You know, same thing as, but unlike, they didn't indict the mafia boys, but they won't indict the brothers. So I mean, that's basically how it came down,
Okay.
right?
You know, the last time we were together, Jack, we were doing a program called From Human Rights to Civil Rights.
Yes.
For me, that's the greatest injustice that our community has ever suffered, was to be reduced from human beings to chattel, so-called slaves. And then being told that we were given some sort of special privilege or reward to have been given civil rights. And Malcolm raised the question,
Yes.
why are we fighting for civil rights? The right to sit down next to somebody at a lunch counter, when we ought to be fighting for human rights. The right to do all the things guaranteed by the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Somebody in here knows something about constitutional law, I heard.
Yeah. Well, let me say this, Dr. Peace. That's why it's always so enjoyable talking to you, because you raise and ask the right questions. It just so happens, coming here today, I said the appropriate thing for me to bring would be Dred Scott. Now, Dred Scott answers the question you're talking about, because in Dred Scott, Roger B. Taney, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, clearly enunciates the principle that black people are not human beings constituted like white people. He says that. And the question I raise is, why aren't our people raising the issue you just raised? Why are we still under this cloud of confusion? And I dare say because we are in this trance of not answering what Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, the great ancestor, said. We are not in touch with the truth. Taney, in this great decision he authored, illuminates the history of how blacks came to America, why blacks came to America, and why blacks, which he described blacks of African ancestry, are not citizens. And I submit to you, as we sit here today, and we got a great lawyer over here could check me if I'm wrong, Dred Scott has never been overturned. Dred Scott was superseded by the 13th and 14th Amendment, which is
Talk
called the
about
New
that
Constitution.
13th Amendment. They had a whole big movie out on, documentary on the 13th Amendment.
I saw the movie. I thought they did a pretty good job, but they're not answering the real question. The 13th Amendment in actuality continues, quote unquote, slavery. Because the clause in there says, unless you are incarcerated. So what did they do? They started incarcerating black men wholesale. Chain gang, no chain gang. We're going to put you in prison. Now, Dr. Peace, you have hit on something that I just came across. As of today, we're sitting here. 9% of the world's prison population is the African American. In other words, out of 7 billion people, almost 1 out of 10 prisoners in the world comes from America, and they black. That's not me saying that. That's this guy, Mr. Jason Stanley, in his book, How Fascism Works. That's his statistic. I ain't making it up. That's what he said. And he said he got on this quest because his grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. And his grandfather was telling him, man, there's parallels between this Holocaust of the Jewish people and this Holocaust of the black people. And so that made him inquire. And this is the statistic. Think about that. 9% of the world's prison population. That's why I started saying about him what I said. Every time you fight to keep a brother or a sister out of prison because you feel it's some injustice going on here, you are fighting the good fight.
What about this, Attorney Willis?
Well, I want to elaborate a little bit on what Jack said, but I want to get back to what you just said because it's very important. You know, remember Malcolm one time said that we've been bamboozled and hoodwinked?
Right.
We have been, as a people, bamboozled and hoodwinked as to who we are in relationship to this place called North America. I would invite your listeners, your viewers, to go and read, if not the entirety of, at least portions of Dred Scott versus Sanford. This case was decided in 1857. Dred Scott was suing for his citizenship rights.
Because he had been taken from a, quote, slave state to a free state. And
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And it went up the court's ladder, came up to the Supreme Court of the United States, and Chief Justice Taney from Kentucky, a slave owner, authored the most seminal work, as far as I'm concerned, on the social legal condition of African people in America. And as Jack said, he makes it very pointed that you were bought here as a commodity, not as a human being, not as a citizen, and you should never be afforded these rights. And like Jack said, and which we must understand, that case has never been overturned by any court. Now, let me step back a moment and say, there is a serious distinction between human rights and quote-unquote civil rights. And throughout our history, our sojourn in North America, we have had brothers and sisters who have attempted to articulate this. You go back to Du Bois, you go back to Paul Robeson, you go back to David
Frederick
Walker,
Douglass.
you go back to they took the position that we have to fight this battle on a different level, because once you start talking about civil rights, that you're constrained within the laws that your oppressor imposes upon you. And I wanted to say this, and I'll leave it at that. And I was talking to Jack about that a minute ago. At no point in time was there ever a plebiscite amongst Africans in America to determine whether or not we wanted to stay here or whether we wanted to go back to Africa or the Caribbean or wherever we wanted to go. We have never had the opportunity to vote on this issue. And I think that's very significant, because when you read the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, when you read the Constitution in and of itself, these were authored by slave-owning white folks who were concerned about their vested interests. That's why we were denoted as 3/5 of a human being in the Constitution, in that document itself. We are denoted as 3/5 of a human being. In the Constitution of the United States, they talk about the Fugitive Slave Act, where they legitimize coming to hunt us down anywhere in this country if a white boy said, I own that Negro. You understand? These are their laws, not ours. And we have never taken the position, we've never been in a position to articulate our own view on these laws. That's all I have to say about that.
Well, you said a lot. You know, the thing that I think gets lost on a lot of people is this notion of chattel. You know, when you said brought here as commodities, you know, you say slaves, which I object to for good reason, because I think when you go and take free people, those are captives. And they are not slaves, and you are not their master. Those are captives, and you are their captor. So it's a different dynamic and a different relationship. But the thing is that when you reduce a human being to chattel, devoid of humanity, then I don't think our people understood that that's different from just calling somebody who works and does not get paid who has no will of their own to exercise. The fact that someone can look at you and see a piece of furniture or a horse or anything else that you can trade, you trade in commodities, can look at a person, a child, a woman, a boy, a man, can look at a person and not see a human being, requires some kind of special psyche. That's something else that has not been explained. But you have to come to grips with that. And the thing about, I think that even though we have had leaders, as you pointed out, all down through our history, Frederick Douglass said, crimes that would disgrace a nation of savages. What to a slave is the 4th of July? I mean, when you had one after another black men and women with enough courage to tell it like it is and to act on it, and we are still not willing to face up to it, is a travesty. But I think at some point we just want to overcome. We just want to explain, we want moral suasion to work. We want to explain to people who have been unjust and uncivil how we have suffered as a result, so that they will feel some remorse and will repent of their ways, and then we can go on and live in harmony from this day forward. So I think we want a truth and reconciliation like they had in South Africa, where you come up and you're the one who murdered my child, and I will say, I forgive you and embrace you, and then we will go forward hand in hand. Now, I think that's kind of the sentiment that you see among our people. Is that wrong?
Absolutely wrong, Dr.
Why?
Peace.
It's
insanity.
a godly thing to do.
It's insanity, but it depends on how you define and frame your God. See, Dr. Bobby Wright used to ask us a question. If you praying to their God and they praying to their God and they winning, what does that mean for you? He said, you got to get you a new God. Dr. Bobby Wright. Now, I submit to you, Dr. Peace, we are suffering from one of the greatest bamboozlements of all time. You cannot discount the intellectual capacity to change a whole group of people's thinking away from themselves and put it in the position of helping another group. And that's what black people do. Black people are the only people. Years ago at the community, presented a little paper on, I think it's Mr. Chen or Mr. Khan, a Chinese gentleman. He was asked a question. What do we say to the blacks that say to us, why aren't y'all hiring us? His response was, it's not that we dislike the blacks. It's not that we hate the blacks. It's that we love the Chinese. We don't love ourselves because we've been trained not to love ourselves. And all of this shooting and killing ain't got nothing to do with crime, because ain't nobody stealing from nobody, ain't taking nothing. They just kill people and speed off. That's insanity. We've been driven insane. And nobody wants to come to ground zero and say, okay, how do we rectify this problem? How do we stop hating ourselves and begin to love ourselves again and put this in perspective in the world? I submit to you, Dr. Peace, all over the world, Africans in Africa, Africans here, Africans in the Caribbean, they all don't like themselves. They look in the mirror, they see black. When I told you I was a teacher in the Dayton public school system, I used to have a full-length mirror in my classroom. I caught this beautiful black girl. This girl had been kissed by the ancestors. She was jet black, but she was extremely good looking. She was a young girl, but she didn't know it. I caught her looking in the mirror frowning. She didn't know I had come in the room. I said, "Why are you frowning?" And I asked her this direct question. "Are you frowning because you don't look like the Clairol girl?" She said, "Yes." That's why she was frowning, because she didn't look white. She was the antithesis of white, and she hated herself. This was a beautiful child. So I submit to you on a grander scale that until a people regain the power to love themselves, cherish themselves, they are not going anywhere but down. That's why I created what I call the bamboozlement index from 1 to 10. And you can attribute the state of bamboozlement based on the conduct of the people you see acting. All these people we got running around here now, protesting different things, they should be in the house somewhere trying to figure out how to own and control something. You can protest all you want. They ain't gonna, what does that mean? You protested. Own and control something, like Dr. Claude Anderson tells us. If you don't, no one in the world will respect you. They respect the Chinese now. They didn't, when we was kids, they didn't respect no Chinese. If you said made in China, that was a dirty word. That was dirty. Now Chinese have maintained their good posture in the world again, and everybody's genuflecting, trying to figure out what can we sell the Chinese? What can we do with the Chinese? They've taken half of Africa now. Okay, they invested all kind of stuff. I don't know how them brothers are gonna pay them back, but all I'm saying is, if you don't do that, you can't get anywhere. And that brings us to another delicate point in the black community. You see all these advertisements? Register, vote, register, vote. When you vote, does that put a chicken in your pot? Does that make your school better? What is the relationship to voting and your up the scale, making your life better? Let me put it like that.
Voting is a civil right, Jack.
Yes, it is.
And we have the right to vote because we have, was it Lyndon Johnson? Somebody gave us the right to vote because we didn't used to have it.
That's right. And we've been voting for one party at a time. Historically, first it was Republican Party, because that was the party of Lincoln, the man who hated blacks. I mean, understand this. They had to march on Washington at the Lincoln Memorial, wasn't it? The man said he didn't like black people. That ain't me quoting him. That's Lerone Bennett, the great ancestors, in his book, Forced into Glory. If you read that, you'll say, whoa.
If you read the forerunner of that book called The Race by T.R.T.H. Cheatwood,
Okay.
you would find that same thing, the direct quotes from Abraham Lincoln, who never pretended
That's right.
that the races should live together in harmony and
That's
believe
right.
that they were equal.
That's
So,
right.
but the thing is, now, we have been here, lo, these many years. We have built a nation. We're not willing to allow somebody not to allow us to live in the house that we built and to do all the things in the house that we built that human beings do in their own houses. We own something. Our name is not on the title.
Well, let me say this.
Whose labor built this country, Jack?
But yes, our labor built this country. Our labor built this economy. But guess what?
On the backs of our ancestors.
But guess what? 8 people in the world, as it is presently constructed, own half the wealth of the world. Okay? They are controlling everything from your politics to that bad food they send to you, all these prescription drugs. They are in control because we are not in control of our minds. We don't even believe that there's a superpower, a little elite group. I said to people years ago, the oligarchs run it. The president of the United States ain't running it. Trump ain't running nothing. Everybody want to throw rocks at Trump. He talks crazy, but he ain't running it. There is a group of elites in the world that control the world. So if we don't properly identify who's doing things to us, we can't remedy the problem. Yes, we've worked, we've built this country on our backs, our parents' backs, our grandparents' backs, but we don't own nothing.
We do own it. Our name is not on the deed.
Well, I got this to say to you, Dr. Peace.
No, I'm saying that the illegitimate control, when somebody, the settlers came here and settled on the land, the indigenous people were here.
Yeah, that's
They
right.
came and settled on the land and dispossessed the people whose land it was, who were the original people on the land, of the land. It doesn't give them ownership. It gives them control. They are controlling land that they should not be in control of. So the thing is, how do you wrest control? With a piece of paper? I mean, you write the Emancipation Proclamation, that's a piece of paper. You do stuff on paper, and the stuff you do on paper is supposed to take, except that it doesn't.
Right.
So
But see, those are
how did they wrest control of everything that they took possession of?
by violence.
Well, are you willing to be violent, Jack?
No,
I don't want you to answer that
That's
question.
right. I'm not going to
No,
listen.
you are not. You are not to
man.
incriminate yourself.
right, I'm a
Your lawyer
peace-loving
sitting
man.
to you. Tell him don't incriminate himself.
I'm a peace-loving man.
I'm a peace-loving woman.
Right.
But I do know this, that you cannot go through generation after generation of being this unstable and being this vulnerable and survive it.
Well, they don't want us to survive.
I'm talking about we need to think about that.
But see, that's
we need to not think
Right.
that if our son walks out of the house,
Right.
he's not coming home. We're not.
Yeah.
We don't need to think. We don't need to always have the worst possible outcome in our minds if we get a phone call
Yes.
at an unusual hour of the night, that the worst possible thing has happened.
That's
and
true.
generally speaking, is that not the case?
That's good. But why is it the case? They have programmed us to do this to ourselves.
Why are we letting them do all these things? If we're able to say, Attorney Willis, get in this. If we are able to say they have taught us, they have programmed us, they have done if the moment you are able to say that, then that's your agenda. You know what you have to do. If somebody else has taken away your will, your autonomy, your right, then it's your duty. It's incumbent upon you to take what's yours back and not be able to say tomorrow that somebody is still doing the same thing. They may be trying to do the same thing tomorrow, but they ought not to be succeeding. You ought to not to still be hating yourself. You ought not to still be getting programmed, because now you woke up on the game. When you wake up on the game, you no longer the game. You the hunter now.
Yeah. But the problem is there's so few of us that have woke up on the game. You have been woke a long time
And nothing has changed for my people.
because it takes an aggregate group of people, and I'm not talking about the masses, because I don't believe the masses follow the leaders, but the aggregate group of people have to mass themselves and give a social theory to the masses. Our people don't even have a social theory. Our people don't even know who they are. You do, he does. He's a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of the world, but the average black person knows not who they are. So they are reviewing life's events through a different prism. Most of the time, they're using victim analysis. Oh, it's my fault. I must have done something wrong, Mr. Charlie. I did something. I'm going to be better tomorrow. We still in that because we're not trying to walk the planks of freedom. That's why Dr. Wilson said, and I use this quote now, this is my mantra, we must get in touch with the truth. What is the truth? When somebody goes in the country and takes you out and puts you in chains and makes you work for free and kills you, that's an act of war. That's why I can't wait for Hunter to come out with the book, We Were Never Slaves, because that's a debunking of the term. Our people have gotten enamored with the term slave. It's like it's some mystical good thing to work for Master Charlie. It ain't. It's bad.
We got the whole language from another people.
That's
This is
true.
not our mother tongue,
That's
so
right.
don't start in on that. I gotta make him talk to me because he's sitting over there just smiling and holding his hands together in deep thought. You ain't keeping those thoughts sitting across from me.
Well, let me say this, Dr. B. First of all, I take this position, I argue with people all the time. We have regressed, in my opinion, in the last 50 years. I take the position that at least spiritually, psychologically, and educationally, we were better off in segregation. Because we were forced into a situation to have to address these particular aspects of ourselves. We had businesses. You know, like I said, I came from a family of educators. We had people teaching in grade schools and high schools and colleges back in those days who had PhDs, masters, and all kind of degrees, but they couldn't teach in the white people's school. But they brought not only the education, but the caring and the love to ensure that children receive the proper education.
And the real models, so that you could know that you too could grow up. My grandmother was a teacher. My sister was a teacher. 2 of my aunts were teachers. That seems very plausible, doesn't it? When you
Well, that's
look
my point.
around you and you see people like you
That's my
who are
point.
doing these things, it just comes as second nature. Oh,
Absolutely.
I'm going to do one of these things.
Now, juxtapose that, 2018. Let's just talk about in the city of Chicago. How many committed black teachers are in the school system? How many committed black men are in the school system? So it goes back to what you just said. For example, you have all these charter schools, you have all these different kind of things they've created. But these kids, these black kids, are not seeing what you just said. They're not seeing on a mass scale intelligent, committed black people as role models for what they may be. And not only that, but the education itself is bankrupt. They're not teaching these kids what they need to know, first of all, about their history. Once again, it gets back to the point, you have to know from whence you come. And very few schools in the public school system are giving this information out to our people on a mass scale to say, this is from whence you came. So if you don't know from whence you came, then you don't know the game that you're playing in right now. And that's why our people are in a state of confusion and they're in a state of depression because of the confusion. And a lot of that has to do with lack of knowledge of self and lack of knowledge intellectually, intellectual development. That's a problem. But I want to also get back to this point. One thing we lost, in my opinion, is the courage to fight. You see, once you analyze the situation of the black people in America, you have to make certain decisions. For example, I'll give you 2 examples. Marcus Mosiah Garvey, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. See, they raised issues and they created conditions and they created institutions, which is another thing we need to talk about, that brought our people up to a certain level of understanding. But it brings into to light the contradiction of our existence in North America, period. And so, in my opinion, once you come to the ultimate contradiction of our existence in North America, the question is, what do we do from here becomes very painful. Because our people psychologically and spiritually not prepared to wage the kind of war, and I'm going to say that straight up, war that needs to be waged in order to obtain self-determination. And I use that word because if you look at any constitution in the world, if you look at any national formation in the world, the underpinning of that, including this country here, is the issue of self-determination. This is what Marcus Garvey talked about. This is what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad talked about. This is what all of their prodigies talked about. The issue of self-determination. And the question, what does that mean? That means you control your mind, you control your education, you control your businesses, you control every aspect of your life. And if you don't control every aspect of your life, then you are a slave in the truest sense of the word. We are at this point in time in 2018 powerless, not because we are powerless, but because in our consciousness we are powerless. We've been beat down to that point and extent. I'm just saying all that to say that we as a people have to reconstitute ourselves, particularly in the area of education, in the area of mental health, in other areas, and in the area of business. We have to go within. We have to go within and reconfigure ourselves individually and collectively. Because as Jack said early on, if you don't control anything, nobody's going to respect you. We're the least respected people on the planet Earth, even though we're the baddest people on the planet Earth. When I go to Africa, they look to us for guidance. They look to us for understanding about certain things. And they are equally as bamboozled over there, but they look to us because they think that we know because of the conditions that we have had to come up under. So all I'm saying to you is that, and I'm saying this, in my business, dealing with these young people today, our people are mentally and morally handcuffed, educationally handcuffed. You'd be amazed at the number of young people that cannot read, they cannot write, they cannot communicate a thought. They have no thought. And I'm not condemning all of them, but I'm saying there's a large proportion of our people, particularly in the inner cities and in the rural areas of America, who don't even have the basic understanding to be able to move forward in a positive way. And then we get back to the issue, as you two were talking about earlier. This issue of self-hate is very, very dangerous. But it's the essence of our people. When we look at each other, we look at each other with contempt, with hate. How are you going to kill somebody on your block, down the street from you, just because? But you're not going to go up north and kill a white man or a white woman. Because that we have been trained, as Bobby Wright goes back, you talk about, right. We have been trained to do this to ourselves. Mm-hmm. And on the other side of the coin, I'm going to go back to what Bobby Wright said, because I live by this, the pamphlet, the book he wrote, The Psychopathic Racial Personality. To believe that you're going to get justice from what I call amoral people, totally amoral, is absolute lunacy. To believe that somebody someday is going to wake up and say, oh, we've wronged these people and we have to make this right. That's lunacy. If you understand the reality of their mindset, of their consciousness, and how they live and believe. It's just not going to happen. So in light of that fact, we have to make certain serious decisions about how we're going to live our lives.
Here's my read on all of this. We have to stop deifying our oppressors. They are not God. Now you're going to get yourself somebody. I don't care whether Muhammad or Buddha or Jesus. I don't care who you choose, but you have got to have a deity that has all power, omnipotent, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. You have got to have that force. There's no other way to do it. You cannot pray to a force that does not recognize you, and a force that you do not recognize is not going to respect you. So that we have to start spiritually. When you said go within, all of what we need is already there. It was there from the beginning. It isn't gone. We are just not utilizing it. We are not, listen, you can get in that Bible and get as much out of that Bible as anybody else can get if you know how to read. But you have to know who you are. You have to know your African history. That was not a mistake, that your ancestors were African on the African continent. You have got to pair all of these things, scholarly things, with spiritual things in order to become a whole person who can then love yourself because you know yourself. Know thyself is on the walls of the pyramids. That's why you exist, to know thyself.
Well, Dr. Peace, what you saying is the profound truth. But let me say this to you. Black people, and particularly some of our clergy and intellectuals, so-called, have been complicitous in this deification of God, because we never dealt with God. And if you deal with God, you will know that this image of Jesus Christ, the image
but you
of
don't
God,
work.
but
you
that's
work
what we've
with
been-
you work with
agree.
a formlessness that has no image.
I agree with you, Dr. Peace, but when you walk into these churches,
I
what do
didn't
you
tell
see?
you where to go.
What do you
I
see?
said go here.
I agree with you.
Stop looking outside of yourself
agree with
for what we need. What we need is in here. If we go in there, now that takes some discipline now. That don't mean just sitting there for a minute. If you meditate and go inside and study, you will find what we need as a people. And as you point out, Jack, it can't be just a single one of us, but the more of us who do that, you will come to a meeting of the minds where nothing can ever again hold you in bondage. But this is how we have to come out of this. And we must not give up hope. Do not ever think that there are any people superior to you on the planet. We the first people, we the first parents, the first teachers, the first in everything. You are not Alpha and Omega, didn't go nowhere. So you just need to become more aware of yourself, and you cannot fall prey to predator clergy who are looking out for their own interests.
Amen.
I don't know if I should have said that. Do you think I
Amen.
should have said that?
Yeah.
That's a legitimate
That's a
statement.
legitimate
Oh
statement.
my goodness, now I won't be able to hold my head up among people. I enjoyed you, Jay Childs. I'm sorry we just ran out of time.
Yeah.
It's a deep,
Robert,
it's a deep discussion. You know?
Yeah, this is
It's
a real
heavy
discussion.
oh, we was having a good time.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I was about to shout. He was over there. I said, where? Oh, he's sitting over there rubbing his hands together. I had no idea. Oh, he was churning up all of that.
Yes, ma'am.
I was
Yes,
watching the
ma'am.
ceiling because I didn't know it was going to stay up there. I didn't know it was going to go outward. Come.